What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The first time Emma McAllister stepped through the iron gates of Greyfriars Kirkyard, she felt something stir beneath her skin. The air inside was colder, sharper, as though she had stepped into a pocket of time that had refused to move forward. With the rest of Edinburgh, rain had fallen all morning, the kind of gentle Scottish drizzle that painted the cobblestones black and left the whole city glistening under a pale northern sun. By the time she reached Candlemaker Row, the clouds had broken, leaving the streets steaming faintly as if the old city was exhaling. The wrought-iron gates of the kirkyard stood open, inviting yet solemn, their black bars slick with rain. Emma hesitated before entering. She had dreamed of this moment for years, since she was a little girl and first heard the story of Greyfriars Bobby, the loyal Skye Terrier who had guarded his master's grave for 14 years until he too was laid to rest. She had read every book she could find, seen every tourist photograph, but none of them had prepared her for the stillness that lay on the graveyard like a shroud. It wasn't just quiet, it was expectant, as though the ground itself was listening. Emma stepped inside. The sound of the city softened instantly. The hum of traffic, the laughter of tourists, the faint strains of bagpipes from a busker on George IV Bridge, all of it faded, swallowed by the moss-covered stones and the high walls that enclosed the kirkyard. She felt as though she had stepped not just into a graveyard, but into a memory. Rows of gravestones leaned at odd angles, some so eroded by centuries of weather that their inscriptions were illegible, others still sharp and proud. Angels and cherubs watched with blank faces from the tops of monuments. The grass was wet and dark, dotted with fallen leaves, and the air smelled of rain and something else, earth, stone, and a faint metallic temps that she could not quite place. Emma walked slowly along the path, her boots crunching softly against gravel. She passed the Covenanters' prison, its heavy gates locked, the grass beyond eerily empty. She had read about this place tooth a field, where hundreds of Covenanters had been held in the open air during the winter of 1679, starved and tortured until many died. The mass graves still lay underfoot. Locals said their spirits still lingered here, restless and bitter. She tried not to look too long at the stones that marked those graves. Eventually, she found Bobby's grave. It was a simple, polished headstone, newer than most of the others, and it stood near the entrance, as though even in death, Bobby was watching over the gates. Greyfriars. Bobby died the 14th of January 1872, aged 16 years. Let his loyalty and devotion be a lesson to us all. Emma knelt, brushing her fingers against the damp grass. It seemed almost absurd, paying respects to a dog who had been dead for over a century. But there was something about the story that had always gripped her heart, and then she heard it. A faint sound, barely audible, the scratch of claws on stone. Emma straightened sharply, her breath catching. She looked around, but there was no one nearby. The graveyard was still. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what might have been the soft jingle of a collar. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She turned toward the sound and froze. At the far end of the kirkyard, near a row of old stones, something small was sitting very still. A dog. It was hard to see clearly through the lingering mist, but she could make out its outline. Small, shaggy, terrier-like. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it was watching her. Bobby, she whispered, immediately feeling foolish for saying it aloud. The dog did not move. Emma took a step forward, then another. The mist thickened briefly, obscuring her view, and when it cleared, the dog was gone. No sound of running, no rustle of grass, just empty space. Emma stood there for a long time, her breath quickening. Finally, she shook her head, laughed softly to herself, and turned to leave. It was probably just her imagination. People came here wanting to feel something, didn't they? Maybe she had simply seen a local dog. That night, she checked into a small guest house overlooking Candlemaker Row. Her room faced the kirkyard. She had chosen it deliberately, thinking it would feel romantic, atmospheric. But as darkness fell, she found herself unable to look away from the graveyard below. The moon hung low, silvering the stones, and the trees cast long, thin shadows like black fingers across the grass. She told herself she was being silly, but she left the curtains open. Somewhere just past midnight, Emma woke to a sound. It was faint but distinct, the single sharp bark of a dog. She sat upright in bed, heart pounding, and went to the window. The kirkyard lay still under the moonlight. And then movement. Near Bobby's grave. Something small darted across the grass, too fast for her to see clearly. Emma stayed at the window until the moon sank lower and the first grey light of dawn touched the stones. Over the next few days, she could not keep away from Greyfriars. Every morning, after a cup of tea at the cafe down the street, she found herself walking back through the gates. Sometimes she saw tourists, guides leading groups through the rows of graves, telling stories about George Mackenzie, the infamous Bluedy Mackenzie, whose mausoleum was said to be the most haunted spot in Edinburgh. But often she was alone. And sometimes, when the mist was thickest, she felt as though she was not alone at all. Once, she felt a brush against her leg, quick and light, as though a small animal had passed by. She looked down, but there was nothing there. Another time she heard panting, soft and steady, coming from behind her. When she turned, nothing. She began asking the locals about Bobby, carefully at first, afraid they might laugh at her. Most smiled indulgently, telling her the well-worn story, as if she were just another tourist. But one man, an elderly groundskeeper with a lined face and pale eyes, looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Some say he's still about," he said finally. "Seen near his grave, mostly. Folk hear him at night barking, sometimes scratching at the gates. We don't like to speak of it much. Best to leave him be." Emma felt a chill trace her spine. "Have you seen him?" she asked. The man hesitated. "Aye," he said at last. "Once, long time ago. Thought it was just a stray, but it vanished before my eyes." He looked away then, as though the memory unsettled him. Emma thanked him and left, but the conversation stayed with her. That night, she dreamed of Greyfriars. She dreamed she was standing by Bobby's grave, and the dog was there, sitting patiently, his fur matted with rain. He looked at her with dark, intelligent eyes, and she felt a sudden rush of grief so strong it nearly drove her to her knees. When she awoke, there were muddy paw prints on the wooden floor of her room. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the paw prints. They were faint, just smudges of dirt on the floorboards, but unmistakable for small pads and a smear where claws had pressed against the wood. She reached down and touched one. The dirt came away on her fingertips, damp, as though it had been left only moments ago. Her breath came shallow. The window was closed. The door was locked. There was no way any animal could have entered the room. Emma stayed awake until dawn. Lights on, waiting for another sound. There was none. By morning, the prints had faded, as though the floor had simply absorbed them. She told no one, but something had changed. When she walked through Greyfriars that day, the air felt different, thicker somehow, as though charged with unseen electricity. She felt watched, not by tourists or guides, but by something quieter, older. The next night brought dreams again. This time, she was running through the kirkyard, breathless, chasing the small dark figure ahead of her. Bobby darted between gravestones, always just out of reach, until he stopped before the black doors of a mausoleum. Emma slowed, heart hammering, as she recognized it. Mackenzie's mausoleum. The door stood slightly ajar in the dream. A low wind seemed to breathe from within, smelling of earth and something sickly sweet. Bobby wind, looking from the door to her and back again, as though urging her closer. Emma reached out a hand and woke with a cry. Her room was ice cold, her breath misting in the air. The curtains stirred though the window was shut. Somewhere below, in the darkness of the kirkyard, she heard the faint sound of barking. It was not joyful barking, it was sharp, urgent. She pressed her hand to the glass and thought she saw a small shadow near the gate before it melted. Into the night the following day, she went to the kirkyard early, before the tours began. The grass was wet with dew, and the morning mist clung low to the ground. She found herself drawn toward Mackenzie's mausoleum. The massive black tomb stood at the far end of the kirkyard, its stonework heavy and oppressive. Locals called Mackenzie Bluedy Mackenzie for the cruelty with which he persecuted the Covenanters, and they said his spirit still roamed this place, furious and violent. Emma had always dismissed ghost stories as just that, stories, but now, standing before the mausoleum, she felt something shift deep in her gut. The air here was heavier. She heard the faintest sound then, the click of claws on stone. Turning, she saw him again. Bobby. He stood a few yards away, watching her. This time, she saw him clearly. His fur was rough, damp from the grass, and his eyes were dark, glinting. Emma's breath caught. "Bobby," she said softly. The dog turned and trotted toward the mausoleum, stopping just before the door. Emma followed. Every instinct told her not to go closer. Locals warned against touching the mausoleum, against disturbing what lay within. They told stories of people collapsing, of scratches appearing on their skin, of sudden fainting spells. But Bobby was waiting. When she reached the door, she saw that it was slightly ajar. Not enough to see inside, just enough to notice that it was not fully shut. The dog barked once, sharp and loud in the quiet kirkyard. Emma reached out a trembling hand and pushed the door open. The darkness inside yawned like a throat, and then something moved. A rush of cold air swept out, carrying with it a smell of decay so strong it made her gag. From the shadows, there came a sound, a low growl. Not canine, not human. Emma stumbled back, heart in her throat. Bobby growled too, a small, defiant sound, placing himself between her and the mausoleum door. And then, just as suddenly, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the kirkyard like a gunshot. When Emma looked again, Bobby was gone. That night, she could not sleep. The guest house seemed too quiet, too still, as though holding its breath. Every creak of the old floorboards made her flinch. At some point, near 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door, slow, deliberate. She froze, listening. They stopped just outside her room. For a long moment, there was silence. Then dash, scratch. Not at the floor, at the door. Soft, rhythmic scratching, like claws dragging across wood. Emma's throat went dry. She rose slowly, crossed to the door, and pressed her ear against it. The scratching stopped. She waited, heart thundering. Then, right at the base of the door, came a soft, wet sound like breathing. Something was on the other side. She backed away, hands shaking. When she dared to open the door an hour later, the hallway was empty, but there were muddy paw prints leading away toward the stairs. The days blurred. Emma stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. The prints appeared again, always damp, as though freshly made. Sometimes they led to her window, sometimes to the foot of her bed. She began speaking aloud when she was alone, whispering into the darkness. "Bobby," she would say, "what do you want?" Sometimes, very faintly, she thought she heard a whine in reply. The dreams grew worse. In one, she stood in the Covenanters' prison at night, surrounded by rows of shadowed figures. They stared at her with hollow faces, silent. Bobby stood among them, barking furiously, as if trying to warn her away. A shape rose from the shadows then, tall and black and grinning, its eyes like coals. Emma woke screaming. When she turned on the light, there were scratches on her arms, thin, shallow, as though made by claws. She tried to leave Edinburgh once, packed her bags, booked an early train. But as she crossed George IV Bridge, she saw a dog sitting by the entrance to the kirkyard, watching her. Her cab stalled suddenly, as though something had killed the engine. The driver cursed, turned the key, but the car would not start. Emma got out, standing in the middle of the road. The dog was still there, and then slowly it stood and walked back through the gates, pausing to look at her. She followed. The kirkyard was empty, the air unnaturally still. The dog led her once again toward the mausoleum. Emma's breath came quick and shallow. When she reached the tomb, the door creaked open by itself. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, like a living thing. And somewhere, deep within, something laughed. Not loud, not human, just a low, rasping sound that made the hair rise on her arms. Bobby stood at the threshold, barking furiously, his small body tense. And for the first time, Emma felt it clearly, the presence that lingered here. It was not just Bobby, something else was here, watching, waiting. The wind rose as Emma stood before Mackenzie's mausoleum. It howled through the kirkyard, rattling the bare branches, carrying with it the metallic smell of rain and something darker, blood, perhaps, or old iron. The black door of the tomb stood ajar, swinging ever so slightly as if beckoning her. Emma's breath fogged the air. She should have run. Every instinct told her to turn back, to leave Edinburgh and never return. But her feet felt rooted to the ground. "Bobby," she whispered. The dog stood just ahead of her, his little body tense, fur bristling, teeth bared in a soundless snarl. And then the laughter came again, low and rasping, echoing from within the mausoleum like the scrape of stone against stone. Emma stepped forward. The door groaned wider, as if pulled by invisible hands. Inside was darkness, a kind of darkness that was not mere absence of light but presence thick, almost solid, as though she could reach out and touch it. "Who's there?" she said, her voice shaking. For a moment there was silence. "Then get out." The words were not spoken aloud. They struck inside her head like a hammer blow, vibrating through her skull. Emma stumbled back, clutching her ears. The air turned bitterly cold. Her breath came in clouds. Frost bloomed across the black stone of the mausoleum, as though winter had condensed out of thin air. And then the door slammed shut with a thunderclap. Bobby barked furiously, circling the tomb, nails clicking against the stone path. Emma's heart pounded. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum, a low vibration like distant thunder. Then, without warning, something invisible struck her. It was like being hit in the chest by a wave. Emma flew backward, landing hard on the wet grass. Her breath knocked from her lungs. When she looked up, the door of the mausoleum had flung open again, wide this time, and something was coming out. It was not a shape so much as a shadow, taller than a man, its edges writhing like smoke. Two burning points glowed where eyes should have been. Emma scrambled backward, but her limbs felt heavy, as though the air itself had thickened. Bobby stood his ground, barking wildly. The shadow turned its burning gaze on her, and Emma felt a pressure in her head, as though hands of ice were squeezing her skull. Images flashed through her mind, scenes of torture, of screaming prisoners, of blood on snow. She saw men hanged, whipped, left to rot in the open air. She smelled the stench of death, and over it all, she heard laughter. Not cruel, not mad, simply cold. "You are not welcome," the voice said. Emma tried to speak, but no sound came. "Leave this place." The shadow took a step closer, and the ground seemed to ripple beneath it. Emma felt herself sliding, pulled toward the open door of the mausoleum as though by a tide. "No," she gasped, and then Bobby leaped. The little dog hurled himself at the shadow, passing through it like smoke, but the thing recoiled, its form flickering. The pressure in Emma's head eased, just enough for her to scramble to her feet. She ran through the mist, past the gravestones, heart hammering in her chest. She did not stop until she was outside the gates, leaning against the cold iron bars, gasping for breath. When she looked back, the kirkyard was silent. There was no sign of Bobby. That night, she could not bring herself to return to the guest house. She checked into a hotel across the city, hoping distance might offer relief. It did not. The dreams followed her. She dreamed she was buried alive, the weight of earth pressing down on her chest. She dreamed of claw marks gouged into stone walls, of faces screaming silently in the dark. When she awoke, there were bruises on her wrists, as though someone had gripped them, and on the carpet near the door-paw, prints. By the third night, Emma was no longer afraid. She was angry. "This has to end," she said aloud to the empty room. She dressed, pulled on her coat, and went back to Greyfriars. The city was quiet under a thin drizzle. Midnight had passed, and the streets were nearly empty. When she reached the gates, she saw Bobby waiting. He turned and trotted inside without a sound. Emma followed. The kirkyard was shrouded in mist, the gravestones gleaming wetly in the moonlight. She did not hesitate this time. She walked straight toward the mausoleum. The door was open. Inside, the darkness waited. Emma stepped over the threshold. The air turned glacial, so cold it burned her lungs. The shadow was waiting. Its form towered over her, shifting and writhing, its eyes like coals. "Why do you stay?" the voice thundered in her skull. Emma swallowed hard. "Because he does," she said, her voice shaking. "Because Bobby hasn't left." For a moment, there was silence. Then, impossibly, the shadow laughed. "The dog." The voice was contemptuous. "He is nothing. A memory." "No," Emma said. "He's more than that. He's the only reason you haven't taken me." The shadow hissed, and the mausoleum seemed to shudder. Bobby appeared then, materializing out of the mist, his fur standing on end. The shadow recoiled slightly. Emma took a step forward. "You can't have this place," she said. "Not while he's here." The ground shook. The darkness writhed violently, and then the shadow lunged. Emma felt the air knocked from her body as it struck her. She fell to her knees, vision swimming, but through the haze, she saw Bobby charge again, leaping straight into the heart of the darkness. There was a sound then, piercing, almost like a scream. The shadow exploded outward, dissolving into tendrils of smoke that whipped around the mausoleum before vanishing into the night. Emma collapsed, panting. When she looked up, Bobby was gone. The door of the mausoleum stood closed once more, and for the first time, The kirkyard felt still, peaceful. Almost. Emma stayed there until dawn, sitting on the wet grass, watching the sky lighten over the gravestones. When she finally rose to leave, she heard it faint but unmistakable, the jingle of a collar, the patter of paws. She turned. For just a moment, she saw him, Bobby, standing by his grave, tail wagging gently, and then he faded like mist in the morning sun.
When Emma finally returned to the guest house that morning, she felt like she had crossed some invisible threshold. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for days was gone, and the air seemed lighter. She slept for 12 hours straight, dreamless for the first time since she had come to Edinburgh. But when she awoke, the quiet did not feel like peace, it felt like waiting. She spent her last days in Edinburgh, walking the streets aimlessly, as though reacquainting herself with the world. Grassmarket bustled with life, pubs spilling laughter into the evening air. The castle loomed high above, serene and timeless. Yet Emma found her gaze always drifting back to Greyfriars. She visited the kirkyard one final time on a cool September evening. The sky was streaked with red, the last light fading behind the castle as she walked through the gates. Everything was still. She crossed to Bobby's grave and knelt. "Thank you," she said softly. The wind stirred the grass, and for a moment, she thought she heard it. The faintest jingle, a soft bark carried far away. She smiled, and then she turned to leave. On the train, out of Edinburgh, the city unrolled behind her like a painting dot. Emma watched until Greyfriars and its black walls disappeared from sight. By the time she reached London that night, she had almost convinced herself it had all been some strange, fevered dream. Almost. But the dreams returned. At first they were small, things, fleeting glimpses of misty gravestones, the faint sound of claws clicking on stone. Then they grew sharper. One night she dreamed she was standing outside her flat in London, and when she turned the key, she found herself not in her hallway but standing once again at the gates of Greyfriars. The gates swung open by themselves, and in the darkness beyond, something moved. She woke with a start. There was dirt on her bedroom floor. 4 small paw prints led from the door to the foot of her bed. Emma sat very still, her heart pounding. A faint sound echoed in the room, then soft breathing, just at the edge of hearing. And underneath it, a whisper, not words she could understand, just a low, rasping hiss, as though someone were speaking from far away, through earth and stone. Emma rose slowly, crossed to the window, and looked out. The street below was empty, but in the reflection of the glass, she thought she saw just for an instant behind her, the black doorway of the mausoleum. And something standing in it, watching. The next day, Emma packed a bag and left the flat, staying in a hotel across the city. But the whispers followed her. Every night, just before sleep, she heard them, the faint sound of claws on wood, the low growl beneath the floorboards. Sometimes, just as she drifted off, she felt the weight of something small jumping onto the bed, circling once, then settling near her feet. It should have comforted her. But each morning, there were scratches in the wood near the door, deep, fresh, as though something had been trying to get in or get out. By November, Emma no longer slept. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles, and she jumped at every sound. Once, walking home late, she caught sight of a small dog sitting at the corner of her street. Its shape was indistinct in the yellow light of the lamps, but she knew it was Bobby. She stopped, heart hammering. The dog stood, wagged its tail once, and trotted away into the fog. Emma followed, through empty streets, past shuttered shops, until she reached a small park she had never visited before. The dog stopped, in the center of the grass, and sat. Emma stood, shivering. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you here?" For a moment, nothing. Then the wind rose, cold and sharp, and somewhere beyond the park came the sound of a door slamming. Emma turned. Across the street, in the reflection of a darkened shop window, she saw it, the black silhouette of Mackenzie's mausoleum, impossibly out of place, standing where no building should be, and in its doorway, the shadow. Smiling. Emma stumbled backward, heart thudding, but when she looked again, the reflection was gone. The dog was gone too. She was alone in the park, but the whisper followed her home. She never told anyone. Not her friends, not her family. She stopped going to work, stopped answering her phone. Neighbors said they sometimes heard barking from her flat late at night, though she had no dog. Once, the woman upstairs swore she heard a man's laughter coming from Emma's room, deep and mocking. though Emma lived alone. On the final night of winter, Emma lit every candle in the flat. She sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the door. The scratching began just after midnight. Slow, patient, as though whatever was on the other side knew she would not stop at this time. The handle turned, though the door was locked. And from beneath the wood, mist began to seep. Emma closed her eyes. The last thing she heard was the jingle of a collar, the soft pad of paws, and a voice whispering in her ear, "Welcome back." By morning, the candles had all gone out. The neighbors said they heard nothing, but when the landlord entered the flat a week later, the floor was covered in muddy paw prints. And on the wall, scratched deep into the plaster, were 4 words: "She stayed with us."